Okay, so today we're going to go over the backstory of Piers Nivans. He is the second playable character in Chris's campaign in Resident Evil 6. He is a member of Chris's Alpha team in the BSAA branch of North America, and obviously with Chris he has the ability to basically go all over the world, because Chris is obviously one of the founding members of the BSAA and one of the early members, so he has that kind of jurisdiction to do basically whatever he wants. So Piers is part of Chris's really personal team that go all over the world and deal with bioterrorism threats. But today, more importantly, we're going to be talking about Piers' earlier missions, the ones we know of, as well as briefly going over his kind of early life and how he got into the BSAA, because there is a lot of information about that, but we'll more importantly be going over his first missions, which also do reference other characters that people do know quite well from the Resident Evil series, which is pretty cool. So without any further ado, let's just jump into it, because there's quite a lot to go over, and here we go. So straight out of the gate, Piers wanted to be a soldier immediately, from like being a child to all the way through to his adult life. He wanted to be a soldier, and he did manage to get into the US Army. He trained to mainly be a sniper, and went through a lot of training, but also got to the point with his training where he kind of questioned what he was actually doing, and if what he was doing would really make a difference in the future. Eventually, Piers was also scouted by, basically scouted means, kind of picked and kind of chosen by Chris to train more exclusively with him to kind of join and prepare him to join the BSAA, in the North American branch, obviously. For the BSAA, it has divisions all over the world. Obviously, there's the African division, European division, and the North American division, which we know a lot of through other games, Resident Evil 5, 8, and 6. But yeah, after a lot of kind of extensive training, obviously, because, being a part of the BSAA is a bit more than just fighting other people. Obviously, the BSAA do kind of primarily deal with bioterrorism threats, so not exactly humans most of the time. And after a lot of kind of time training, obviously, really kind of putting in the effort, he did get into Chris's team with the BSAA and worked closely with Chris Redfield, being his commanding officer, like, for the foreseeable future. Jumping forward to Australia 2010, this is the first known mission that Piers was involved in. Chris, Piers, and another well-known character in the Resident Evil series going by Rebecca Chambers. I'm sure we all know who that is by now. If you don't, she is one of the primary characters in Chris's storyline in Resident Evil 1. She is one of the playable characters in Resident Evil 0, and she's one of the original stars. So she's quite a big deal, I would say. But yeah, they had been sent to Australia to investigate a philosophy university that had had students disappearing and reports of zombie attacks being kind of happening there. Eventually, the culprit behind it all was known to be a professor there called Ryan Howard, who had basically been abducting students from the university and using them as test subjects on a tyrant-type virus, and the zombies that were kind of roaming around and attacking other students and stuff like that were the failures of his experiments, and he's basically let them loose to just wreak havoc, basically. Eventually, the three of them did manage to contain the situation and deal with it without it causing too much of interference outside of the university's kind of general location, and that was probably not Piers' first mission, but it's the one we know about most. It's interesting that it's in Australia, because we haven't actually had a Resident Evil game set there at all yet, which is interesting. I do wonder if that'll happen in the future, but for now, that's all we know of in terms of anything happening in Australia. Moving forward to 2012 in Mahawa, which is a kind of a Far East branch of BSAA's territory and jurisdiction. Chris and Piers were also there, because again, Chris has this kind of high up power to basically do whatever he wants through the BSAA, which is pretty nice, imagine that. But anyway, they travelled to Southeast Asia in search of a Dr. Doug Wright, and essentially he was a virologist, I think I probably pronounced that wrong, within the BSAA, basically someone who kind of looks at these viruses and kind of examines them and kind of finds out if they're a threat or contains them and researches them, just a doctor basically. Yeah, they went to find him in Singapore, again in a different university, which is weird how it's another university in a completely different country. And basically, when they got there, they found out that Dr. Wright was overdue on his vaccines, because, obviously working with that stuff, you kind of have to be kind of careful in case, you accidentally infect yourself and stuff like that. So he'd missed a dose he needed, which did raise a lot of questions for Piers and Chris. When they did eventually arrive at the university, once again they had discovered that the school had fallen into a complete viral outbreak hours before they arrived, and they essentially split up to find any kind of survivors left inside. Now, it's not entirely known what kind of strain of virus this was. There is kind of mutations throughout the storyline that involve kind of tentacle-like amputations and stuff like that, mutations I should say, and that does kind of vaguely remind me of the Ouroboros from Resident Evil 5. Obviously they kind of turn into like liquid tentacle looking things, but we're not sure. Obviously no one really knows what it is exactly, but they did manage to contain it yet again, and the whole mission was classified by the BSAA and the government of Singapore, just to kind of, you know, cover it up, which is a theme that comes up again later on with the BSAA in the mainline titles, which is very questionable at best. So you really do start to see this other side of the BSAA quite early on if you kind of pay attention to them. And then jump forward to 2012 is when the events of Resident Evil 6 obviously do start to take place. This is part of the Edonia part of the game, where it's basically a flashback in the game, where you find out why Chris has this kind of amnesia and PTSD at the beginning of the campaign. And this is essentially the BSAA helping the Edonian army to combat the C virus. The C virus is the virus that's mainly prominent in Resident Evil 6, and basically turns people into Juavo. To briefly go over what they are, imagine Ganados and Magini from Resident Evil 5 and 4, but they're a bit more there in their human state, like they can think still, they are not dumb, they can use firearms. It's a bit more of a advanced mutation. And then any kind of injury that comes to a person infected with this kind of virus, it will mutate that part of the body. For example, you know, you shoot a Juavo in the arm in RE6 and their arm will mutate into like this massive blade. Basically, you see it a lot in the game. It does actually vary depending on where you shoot someone, which is pretty cool. But yeah, this is definitely a strain of virus that's very, very smart. It's a smart virus, basically. But yeah, while fighting with the Edonian army, Chris and Piers come across a couple of other characters that are very prominent in the Resident Evil 6, going by Sherry Birkin, who is now a federal agent, and Jake Muller. I think it's Muller. People say Mueller, but I think it's Muller. And that is a story for tomorrow. We're going to go over Jake and his story tomorrow, so we're going to skip over that for now. But that's basically it with Piers anyway. Like, a lot of what's left of his story is basically covered in Resident Evil 6, because his story does come to an end in Resident Evil 6 as well. If you play Resident Evil 6, you'll know what that means. If not, you'll have to go find out for yourselves. But it's very interesting. I do like the character. There is a lot of fans of the character as well. Obviously, he's not just appeared in Resident Evil 6. In terms of storyline, I believe there was a play, like an actual play in Japan, I think, that covered one of those stories previously mentioned. I think it's the Singapore one. Could be wrong. But yeah, overall, I think the character's pretty cool. Resident Evil 6, unfortunately, I would say Chris's campaign is the most kind of not horror. It's not bad, but it is a bit overboard. Like, I think Leon and Jake's campaigns are probably the best ones. But Chris's is a bit more very action orientated. It isn't bad by any means, and there's a lot of cool moments in it as well. But yeah, I think out of all of the campaigns, Chris's is probably my least favourite. But you know, I've said that a million times by now. Resident Evil 6 is not a bad game. Is it a good Resident Evil game in terms of, you know, the gameplay and style of Resident Evil? Absolutely not. But the game itself is good, and the story is fine. Honestly, it's just a bit different to the usual. But yeah, I would say it's a good game. But anyway, that'll do it with Piers. Let me know what you think of his character. Do you like him? Do you wish he had more screen time? Do you hope that they cover those older stories in games in the future? Obviously, with the rumours of Resident Evil 9 being the last game in the continuous story, they could pick from different points of the storyline, and maybe those stories are ones they decide to make. Who knows? But yeah, do let me know what you think of the character, and general thoughts of his campaign, or Chris and Piers' campaign, in the comments below. Like I said, we'll be covering Jake tomorrow. I think then we'll go to Sheva from Resident Evil 5. Then I want to cover Simmons, who is basically the main villain in RE6. He's a very interesting character. There's a lot going on with him. Not one of the best villains ever, but still quite interesting. A few more coming up that are relatively soon. Carlos is coming up. Obviously, Carlos is from Resident Evil 3. Billy Cohen is also coming within the next week or so, as well as basically any character that's not a main character. I want to really stress that. Like, the main characters are coming, but there's a lot to go over with those characters, so they're going to take a little bit longer. But any of the characters you want to see kind of covered, do let me know. But yeah, that'll do for now. Thank you for watching. Again, thank you for dealing with my voice. It's a lot better than what it was a couple of days ago, so I should be feeling better soon. And it should sound kind of normal again soon. But yeah, thank you for coming by, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.